Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive Galactic Council chamber, trying not to show how nervous he felt. The room stretched high above him, with tiered rows of alien delegates rising into the darkness like steps to the stars. Bright lights glowed softly from the walls, casting long shadows across the room. Every seat was filled. Hundreds of alien eyes watched him. Some glowed red, others pulsed green or shimmered like ice. They were the eyes of beings far older than Earth's nations. They watched silently, judging. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his face calm. This moment was everything humanity had worked toward. 3 years of tense diplomacy, cautious meetings, and technical inspections. Now, finally, Earth would present its case to join the Galactic Federation. He took a breath and looked up. "My name is Admiral Jake Morrison, speaking on behalf of Earth and the United Human Colonies." A loud sound echoed from the upper tier, a sharp hiss, then a heavy, dragging stomp. Every alien delegate turned. A massive door at the top of the chamber opened with a slow grinding creak. A line of tall figures entered, cloaked in deep red, armored from head to toe. They walked without speaking. Their boots hit the floor like falling iron. At the front of the group was a figure taller than any Jake had ever seen. His armor looked alive, shifting with pulses of dark light. A black crown floated just above his head, spinning slowly. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the leader of the Galactic Council stood from his seat. The tall figure raised a hand. "You may continue, Earthman," he said, his voice low and smooth, like oil slipping through metal. Jake didn't move. A delegate near him whispered, "Supreme Leader Vekar." The name spread through the chamber like cold air. Vakar, ruler of the Empire of Iraq, a warlord who controlled more than half of the known galaxy. He had never attended a council session before. His empire did not answer to the Federation. Why was he here now? Jake's translator earpiece buzzed with chatter, dozens of languages, all speaking at once. Confusion, panic. Vekar began walking slowly down the steps toward Jake. His guards followed closely. With each step, the lights dimmed just slightly, as if his presence pulled power from the air. He stopped only a few feet. In front of Jake, the Supreme Leader looked him up and down, then smiled. "You're the one they sent to speak for Earth." Jake nodded. "I am." Vekar's smile widened. A young man in a borrowed uniform. So much pride in such a small body. Jake tilted his head. "And yet, I'm the only one not bowing right now." The room gasped. Even the guards shifted. Vekar leaned in slightly. "I do not bow to anyone. Neither should you." "Then we're already alike," Jake said. Vekar chuckled. "They say Earth wants peace, but I see war behind your eyes." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What you see is someone who's not impressed." Another ripple of shock moved through the delegates. Vekar's empire had destroyed entire civilizations for lesser insults. Jake didn't care. "You walk in here without being invited," he said. "You interrupt a session that took us years to prepare for, and then you act surprised when we don't shake." "I expected fear," Vekar said. Jake smiled, and then he laughed. Not nervously, not softly, a full laugh. It echoed across the chamber like a challenge. Vekar's eyes narrowed. "You're laughing at me?" he asked. Jake stopped. "No, I'm laughing at the idea that you think Earth fears you." Vekar didn't move, but something behind his eyes changed, a flicker of confusion, maybe surprise. "You should be afraid," he said. "I am the supreme leader of the most powerful force in this galaxy." Jake stepped forward. "And we are the species that turned their own planet into a death world and survived it." For the first time, Vekar was silent. Jake continued. "We fought ourselves for centuries. We burned cities. We ended ecosystems. And we learned. We built peace from fire. We built unity from chaos. You may command fleets, but we command our own minds. You expect submission because it's all you've ever seen." Jake looked him dead in the eyes. "Then you haven't seen humans yet." Above them, the council chamber lights flickered. The presider slowly sat down, his face unreadable. Many delegates looked nervous, but a few smiled. They had seen empires rise and fall, and now they saw something they hadn't in a long time, a species that would not kneel. In a quiet corner of the council, a thin alien diplomat whispered to her assistant, "This is how it begins." Jake remained standing. So did Vekar. Two figures facing each other at the center of power. One ruled through fear. The other laughed in its face. The silence in the Galactic Council chamber was heavier than before. Admiral Jake Morrison and Supreme Leader Vecca still stood face to face at the center, surrounded by hundreds of watching eyes from every known species. The air felt tense, as if even the stars outside had paused to listen. Jake had just done something no one in the galaxy dared. He had laughed at Vecca, the Emperor who had crushed planets and silenced rebellions with a gesture, and now no one moved. The guards beside Vecca shifted their weapons slightly, uncertain. Vecca raised one hand, and they froze. He studied Jake, eyes narrowed like a predator trying to understand why its prey hadn't run. "You are either very brave," Vecca said, his voice deep and quiet, "or very stupid." Jake didn't flinch. "Or maybe I've simply seen your type before. Men who believe power is the same as respect." The Supreme Leader tilted his head. "And Earth, is that what you think you are now? A world of equals?" "We don't think it," Jake replied. "We've earned it." Up in the council tiers, murmurs began. A scaled ambassador from the Tresh Confederacy whispered to her aide, "They're provoking him." Deliberately. An old moss-covered being from the Shenta enclave gave a low groan. "No, they're testing him. They want to see if the Empire bleeds." Vecca's lips curled into a small smile. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Long ago, on a forgotten moon, a warrior once stood before me and said something similar. I fed him to his own soldiers." Jake stared back. "Then he was braver than most." "You're not afraid to die?" Vecca asked, curious. "No," Jake said, "but you should be afraid of what happens if you try." Suddenly, the chamber's main screen lit up. Everyone turned. A report blinked in from the outer rim of Arakan space. One of the Empire's resource colonies, Keltrax Prime, had just gone silent. No distress call, no alarms, just nothing. The message was brief. "All systems lost. Signal blackout. No response from orbital COMMA." And the council erupted in shocked murmurs. Vecca's expression didn't change. Jake slowly turned to face the council. "We didn't do that," he said calmly. "But someone did, and they weren't afraid of you either." The presider finally spoke for the first time. His voice echoed through the room like a chime from a deep cavern. "Supreme Leader Vecca, you came here uninvited. Earth came here by request. Are you accusing them of an attack?" Vecca didn't answer at first. Then he turned, his long cloak dragging softly behind him, and walked toward the center podium. He stood before the entire assembly. "I do not accuse them," he said. "Not yet. But I see in them the same spark that lit the fires of the rebellion wars." He looked at Jake again. "You hide your fire behind peace. I know that fire. It is the beginning of war." Jake stepped beside him. "And maybe," he said, "it's the fire that will finally burn away fear." On Earth, millions watched the session live, across colonies and stations. Humans held their breath. They had sent Jake to represent their unity. But now the galaxy was seeing something else. Their confidence. In the control center back home, Alina Ray adjusted the signal feed. She turned to the military analyst beside her. "He's doing exactly what we hoped." The analyst nodded, making Vecca think twice. "But it's not just about Vecca," Alina whispered. "It's about everyone watching." Back in the council, a young alien diplomat leaned toward an elder. "Why do they keep smiling?" she asked. "Don't they know what Vecca can do?" The elder shook his head. "They know. That's why they're dangerous." Jake addressed the chamber now. "Earth isn't here to threaten," he said. "But we're also not here to beg." He looked around slowly. "For too long, the Federation has accepted fear as the price for peace. But fear isn't peace. It's silence. And Earth, we're done being silent." A long pause. He turned back to Vecca. "You came here to intimidate us. And maybe it worked on others, but not on us. Because fear was never ours to hold." Supreme Leader Vecca stared at him in silence. Then he did something no one expected. He laughed. It wasn't loud or cruel. It was short, deep, and strange. Jake tensed. Vecca looked around at the chamber, amused. "For centuries I have walked through this chamber, and all I saw were heads bowed." He looked back at Jake. "But you stood." Jake waited. I stepped closer. "Tell me something, Earthman. What do you want?" Jake answered without hesitation. A quality voice, respect. "And if I refuse?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "Then Earth becomes the reason your empire sleeps with one eye open." In a small private room far above the council floor, a watcher sat alone, an old alien with deep lines on her face and silver bands on her fingers. She watched the conversation unfold and nodded slowly. The age of fear, she whispered, may finally be over. The great doors of the Galactic Council chamber closed behind Supreme Leader Vecca. His long cloak trailed behind him like a river of darkness, and the heavy sound of his boots faded into silence. Inside the chamber, no one spoke. Admiral Jake Morrison stood alone at the center. His heart still beat fast in his chest, but his face showed nothing but calm. He had done it. He had stared down the most feared man in the galaxy, and hadn't blinked. Far above the council floor, in a private observation room, several high-rank Federation members spoke quietly. That human has no idea what he started, one whispered. No, said the elder next to her. He knows exactly what he's doing. That's what makes it dangerous. In orbit around the galactic core, the Empire's flagship, Obsidian Warden, hovered like a silent predator. Its black surface reflected almost no light. Inside, Vecca's private chamber was quiet. He stood before a long window, staring out into the stars. Prepare the Empire-wide address, he said coldly. His assistant bowed. To all citizens. To all, Vecca replied. Let them see what happens when defiance is born. Hours later, across hundreds of star systems under Imperial rule, every screen lit up. People in crowded spaceports paused. Workers in deep mines looked up. Officers on warships stood still. The image of Vecca appeared calm and deadly. Citizens of the Empire, he began. Today I stood before a species newly arrived among us. They call themselves human. They spoke boldly, too boldly. They laughed in my face. He let that line sit. I say this not to shame them, but to warn you. Their kind is different. They do not bow. They do not fear. And if we ignore them, they will change everything. In the United Colony's main communication center, Alina Ray watched the broadcast with narrowed eyes. He's painting us as dangerous, she said. Jake, sitting across from her, leaned forward. That's exactly what we want. Alina looked confused. You want him to scare them? Jake nodded. We've been small too long. Let him spread fear. We'll spread the truth. In a remote mining colony within Imperial space, a young mechanic named Raoul watched the speech. His tools were still in his hands, but he wasn't listening anymore. Instead, he was replaying Jake's words from earlier. Fear was never ours to hold, Raoul whispered. He didn't sound like a politician. He sounded real. Elsewhere, in a secret meeting room aboard the Obsidian Warden, Vecca met with his war council. They laughed. One of the generals said, "We should respond with strength." "They want us to respond with strength," Vecca replied. "That would only confirm their story." "Then what do we do?" another asked. "We listen," Vecca said. The room went quiet. "Humans are a new force," he continued. "But if we understand their weakness, there is no weakness," came a soft voice. It was his strategist, an old, sharp-eyed woman named Selin. "Fear doesn't work on them," she said. "Not because they are strong, but because they've already lived through worse." She turned to face the council. "They're dangerous, not because they don't fear us, but because they don't need us." Meanwhile, back in the Galactic Council chambers, Jake was finally invited to speak again. The presider leaned forward and said, "You have the floor once more, Admiral Morrison." Jake nodded. He stepped forward, looked at the sea of alien faces, and began again. "Earlier today, we were interrupted. Earth came here to join the Federation, not as beggars, not as children, but as equals." He paused. "The Empire may want to make this about power, but we are not here to take anything. We are here to offer something." That caught their attention. Jake continued. "We offer a memory, a warning, a fire we've already survived." On a ship far outside the core systems, an alien pirate captain listened to Jake's broadcast through a cracked screen. He leaned back and smiled. Finally, he said to his crew, "Someone speaking with teeth." Back in the council chamber, a delegate from the peaceful Oshar species raised her hand. "Admiral, if Earth does not fear the Empire, what do you fear?" Jake took a long pause before answering. "We fear forgetting where we came from. We fear becoming the monsters we once fought. And we fear silence because silence means lies have taken root again." He looked directly at the cameras. "But we do not fear the truth." The message spread like wildfire across the outer systems. Where the Empire's grip was weaker, people replayed Jake's words again and again. For some, it was the first time they had seen someone stand up to power and win. Back on the Obsidian Warden, Vecca stood in silence after watching the full speech. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Selin spoke quietly. You can crush armies, but you cannot crush an idea. Vecca didn't look at her. I can try, he said. The secret message had arrived without warning. Earth's main lunar command center. Alarms didn't go off. No sensors detected movement. No system could trace its path. It was as if the words had simply appeared on the screen. You've made him listen. Now make him afraid. Admiral Jake Morrison stared at the message, hands clenched behind his back. He didn't speak right away. Beside him, Alina Ray leaned forward, scanning for any signal trail. But the screen stayed blank. No origin, she said. No data signature. Nothing. Jake's voice was steady. It came from inside the Empire. Across the galaxy, people were still watching replays of Jake's council speech. Millions had seen him stand face to face with the Supreme Leader and laugh. It had awakened something deep in them, courage, defiance, hope. But inside the Empire, it had awakened something else, fear, not from humans, but from within its own walls. In the outer Imperial colony of Veltron 9, a group of miners watched a smuggled recording of Jake's speech. A young woman, Kira Len, whispered, "Did you hear?" The way he spoke to Vecca, her friend nodded, like he wasn't scared, like he was free. Kira added, "They didn't say it, but the thought was the same in their minds. Maybe we don't have to be afraid either." Inside the Empire's war room aboard the Obsidian Warden, Supreme Leader Vecca sat in silence while his generals argued. Their spreading rebellion words are turning into weapons. We should destroy Earth's signal centers before their influence spreads. We need to take back control. Vecca raised a hand. Everyone stopped. His voice was calm, but cold. No, not yet. He stood, walked to the large star map in the center of the room, and touched a glowing red system. Veltrinine, he said. It's where the first spark will rise. Burn it. At Earth's lunar base. Jake paced in silence. Alina watched him. Carefully. What are you thinking? Jake stopped. He's going to strike somewhere that matters. Somewhere he thinks will scare us into silence. Alina looked down. Then we have to speak louder. Jake turned to the command console. Get me a direct line to the Federation. We need to move before Vecca does. Back at Veltronine, the miners were celebrating a quiet evening. They didn't know they were already marked. Hundreds of kilometers above them, 3 Arakan destroyers entered orbit. Silent as shadows, they powered up weapons. They didn't send warnings. They didn't send orders, just heat signatures. Kira Len looked up from her tool bench as the ground started to shake. Up no rumble. Then a blast from the skies. The nearby storage depot exploded in a fireball, sending debris raining across the mining zone. Panic erupted. People ran for cover. Screams echoed. And then a voice came from the comms tower, hacked directly by the Arakan flagship. This is the Empire. Obedience or destruction. Earth received. The emergency transmission 6 minutes later. Alina's voice cracked as she read it aloud. Veltronine, civilian colony, 3,000 lives. They're under attack. Jake didn't hesitate. Send the Sentinel. Now. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, the presider looked down at the human ambassador. You do not have permission to intervene. That colony is in Imperial space. The ambassador stood firm. That colony is where people believed in us. They are not Earth citizens, the presider warned. The ambassador leaned forward. They are now. The Sentinel, Earth's fastest response cruiser, jumped into orbit above Veltronine 22 minutes after the call. The crew barely had time to power up shields before they were fired upon. Jake stood on the bridge, watching the enemy ships. Through the tactical screen, "Don't fire unless they hit civilian zones," he said. "But Admiral," his officer replied, "we're being targeted." I said wait. On the surface, Kira and the miners took shelter in an old fuel tunnel. She looked up through a vent and saw 3 black ships in the sky, and a 4th one, silver with Earth's insignia. Tears filled her eyes. "They came," she whispered. "They actually came." On the Obsidian Warden, Vecca watched the situation unfold. "They did exactly as expected," said General Morax. "They intervened." "Yes," Vecca replied. "And now we teach them what intervention costs." Back on the Sentinel, red lights flashed. "They're locking weapons," shouted the weapons officer. Jake took a deep breath. "Hold steady." More alarms. Second ship, charging its main cannon. Alina's voice echoed through the bridge speakers. "Jake, they're going to wipe the surface clean." Jake didn't blink. "Target the nearest cannon." and fire. The Sentinel unleashed a precision blast, cutting the enemy weapon before it could fire. The Arakan ship turned and fled. The other two ships backed away, shields up but not returning fire. They hadn't expected resistance this fast, or this accurate. On Ultra 9, cheers erupted from the caves and tunnels. The people saw the sky light up, not in fire, but in protection. The broadcast started with no warning. Across hundreds of star systems, Emperor-controlled, neutral, and Federational endeavory, public screen flickered and changed. On mining stations, spaceports, and cargo ships, the same message appeared. A single image. Admiral Jake Morrison. Standing on the Sentinel's bridge. Behind him. The stars shined through the window. Then came his voice. To all peoples of the galaxy, this is not a call to war. This is a call to memory. You've been told to obey. You've been told to fear. But fear ends where unity begins. The message was raw, unedited, real, and it spread faster than any military ship could travel. On Veltra 9 the fires were still being put out. Craters marked the places where homes once stood. But people were alive, saved by Earth's fast response. Kira Len watched the broadcast from a broken screen beside a half-destroyed fuel tower. Her face was covered in ash, her hands trembling, but she smiled. They didn't abandon us, she whispered. Other survivors gathered around the screen, listening to every word Jake said. Back on Earth, inside the United Colonies High Council chamber, Alina Ray coordinated the transmission nodes. The signal's holding, she said. We're being blocked in 3 sectors, but it's punching through anyway. A technician looked up. Admiral Morrison's feed is being translated into 150 languages. More coming in. Alina nodded. Double quotes. Good. Make sure they all hear him. Inside the Galactic Council, delegates from dozens of species watched the message. Some frowned, some leaned forward with interest, but all of them were listening. The presider stayed silent. Behind him, an advisor spoke softly. He's not just representing Earth anymore. The presider nodded. He's becoming something else. On the Obsidian Warden, Vecca stood before a massive wall of screens. Each showed a different star system, some peaceful, some in chaos. He said nothing. His strategist Selene watched. Closely. They're listening to him, she said. I know. Vecca replied. Do we strike again? He shook his head. No, not yet. Too many eyes are watching. He tapped the glass screen, zooming in on Jake's face. Let them listen. Let them hope. It makes it more painful when it breaks. Meanwhile, deep in the outer systems, resistance cells, some barely more than whispers, began to stir. In the shadows of industrial moons, people passed around copies of Jake's speech. In abandoned communication towers, they set up small relays to rebroadcast the signal. One message began to echo from every hidden voice. Earth speaks. The galaxy listens. Jake's full broadcast lasted only 7 minutes, but it was enough. At the end, he looked straight into the camera and said, This is not Earth rising. This is truth returning. After the transmission ended, Alina sat at her desk, exhausted. Jake walked in well, he asked. Alina looked up. The numbers are still climbing. Millions have seen it already. Jake nodded. Vecca will respond. Maybe not with ships, she said. Maybe with something worse. Jake sat beside her. Let him, he said. We're not alone anymore. Inside the Galactic Council, the presider called an emergency session. Delegates argued. Some called Jake a threat to galactic peace. Others called him a symbol of new unity. And one, an old, quiet being from the frozen world of Harith, stood slowly and spoke. I was alive during the Silence War, he said. I saw what happens when truth is locked away. This human, he does not bring war. He brings memory. Silence followed his words. The room slowly calmed, but in the shadows of the Empire, plans were already moving. Selene entered a dark meeting chamber, where Vecca stood alone. The spark is spreading faster than we expected, she said. Vecca didn't turn around. Then we give them what they want. Selene frowned. What do you mean? Vecca turned slowly, his eyes cold. We let him come. Come where? To the heart of the Empire. Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the viewing window of the Sentinel, staring into the stars. Somewhere beyond them, deep in the center of the Arakan Empire, was Arakan Prime, the capital world of Supreme Leader Vecca. No human had ever been there, and now he had been invited, or lured. Alina Ray entered the bridge, a datapad in her hands. The Federation says not to go, she said. They say it's a trap. Jake turned slightly. It is. Then why accept it? Jake looked back out the window. Because the galaxy isn't watching Vecca anymore. It's watching us. Across Earth and the colonies, the news spread quickly. Jake Morrison invited to Arakan Prime. Earth faces Empire head-on. Will humanity enter the lion's den? Millions watched as Jake prepared for the journey. Even those who once doubted humanity's strength now watched in silence, wondering what one man could say in the heart of darkness. Meanwhile, inside the Empire, the message reached far and wide. On the desert world of Venskar, slaves whispered of a human who defied the supreme leader. On the icy mining colonies of Vostal, workers passed around copies of Jake's broadcast on data chips. And on Arakan Prime itself, the city's great towers buzzed with tension. The arrival of a human was unheard of, unforgivable. Some said, but Vecca had ordered it, so it would happen. Inside the Imperial Palace, Supreme Leader Vecca stood before a vast metal hall. His voice echoed across the floor as he addressed his inner circle. When he arrives, there will be no threats, he said. No weapons, no traps. General Morax frowned. He defied you. Why give him a platform? Vecca's tone turned sharp. Because a flame burns brighter just before it's crushed. Selen stood near the edge of the room, watching her leader with careful eyes. She didn't speak, but inside, she wondered what if the flame can't be crushed. The journey to Arakan Prime was long, dangerous, and surrounded by escort ships. As the Sentinel approached the red and black world, Jake stood at the front of the command deck. Alina joined him. Last chance to turn back. Jake smiled faintly. We didn't come this far to flinch now. They descended into the capital city, a sprawling fortress of towers, bridges, and burning lights. The sky was grey, the air thick with power. Jake stepped onto Arakan soil as the first human in history to do so. No crowd welcomed him. Only guards in red armor and silent drones hovered above. He was led through winding stone halls, metal bridges, and ancient doors until they reached a huge chamber. At its center sat Vecca, alone. His black crown floated above his head. As always, spinning slowly like a storm waiting to begin, Jake stepped forward without fear. Vecca spoke first. No weapons, no tricks, you honor the terms. Jake nodded. We're not here to play games. Vecca's voice dropped low. Then speak. Jake looked around the hall. Cameras floated silently near the ceiling. The galaxy was watching. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He just spoke clearly. You rule through fear. That's your legacy. Vecca didn't move. Jake continued. But fear doesn't last forever. Eventually, people get tired. They stop shaking. They stand up. He took one step forward. Earth didn't come here to fight you. We came to show others that they don't have to kneel. Vecca leaned forward slightly, the shadows around his throne growing darker. Do you think words will break an empire? Jake shook his head. No, but ideas do. He looked straight into the nearest camera drone. And I'm not just speaking to you. I'm speaking to every miner on Veltra 9, every pilot in the outer ring, every worker in the factories you forgot. Pause. We see you. You're not alone anymore. On distant worlds, screens lit up with a live feed. In dark bunkers and crowded dorms, aliens held their breath. For the first time in their lives, someone was speaking to them. Not at them. Vakar rose from his throne. He walked slowly down the steps. You are bold, he said, but boldness is not strength. He stood just a few feet from Jake now. What if I kill you here, in front of all who watch? Jake didn't move. Then I'll become something even harder to stop. Vecca frowned. A symbol. Selen watched from the shadows, and for the first time, she saw doubt flicker in the Emperor's eyes. He had crushed rebellions, burned cities, broken worlds. But this man, this human, was unshaken. The chamber was silent. Supreme Leader Vecca sat, motionless on his throne, the black metal around him pulsing faintly like it was alive. His eyes didn't blink. His breathing was slow, cold. Admiral Jake Morrison stood before him, unarmed and alone, his voice still echoing in the ears of billions across the galaxy. Before you try to destroy Earth, ask yourself, what if Earth is just the beginning? The words hung heavy in the air. In hidden corners of the Empire, people whispered those same words. On mining moons, they scribbled them onto walls. On battle cruisers, they repeated them in mess halls. And in prison camps, they passed them between cell bars. What if Earth is just the beginning? Vecca finally moved. He stood up slowly, each step down the throne's platform, sending a soft thud through the massive room. You speak like a prophet, he said, but your planet is small. Your people, untested. Jake met his gaze. You, once called us primitive, but you've been watching. You've seen what we've built, what we've survived. Vecca's tone turned sharp. And if I wipe it all away in one night? Jake didn't flinch. Then you prove us right. Behind the curtains of the Imperial Palace, Selen watched with narrow eyes. She had advised Vecca for 3 decades. She had seen tyrants fall. She had seen rebellions rise. But she had never seen anyone speak like this to the supreme leader and walk away breathing. She turned to a junior officer beside her. Is the transmission still live? The officer nodded. Every system, every screen. Selen whispered. Good. Let them all see the moment it changes. Back on Earth, millions watched the live broadcast with tense faces. Alina Ray sat in the control center, gripping the arms of her chair. He's holding, she said, softly. He's really holding. One of the technicians looked up. Ma'am, people are flooding the networks. The message is everywhere. The outer colonies, the mid-rings, even deep Empire space. Alina stared at the screen. Then it started. Vecca turned slowly, walking back to his throne but not sitting. You think you're spreading hope, he said. But all you're doing is waking ghosts. He raised his hand. A hologram lit up in the air beside him, dozens of red dots blinking across a star map. Each of these, he said, is a system that once believed in freedom. Now they are ashes. Jake stepped closer to the map. Then maybe it's time to remind them that ashes can still burn. Vecca turned and stared at him. I could end you with a word. Jake smiled faintly. But you haven't. Vecca's hand twitched. Jake took one step forward. You're not afraid of Earth's power. You're afraid of Earth's example. At that moment, a sudden alert flashed on Vecca's personal console. His guards looked confused. Vecca frowned. Selen appeared beside him with a data slate in hand. Sire, she said carefully, you need to see this. He grabbed the slate, and his eyes narrowed. Rebellion spark detected Sector 7F. Outer reach. Local civilians have overtaken Imperial garrison. They call themselves the First Flame. Vecca's hand tightened into a fist. Selen didn't speak, but inside, she thought, it's already begun. Jake watched the reaction and knew something had happened. What is it? He asked. Vecca slowly handed the slate to one of his guards, who quickly disappeared into his side room. They think you're leading them, he said. I'm not, Jake replied. I'm just reminding them. They can lead themselves. In the rebel zone of Sector 7F, thousands of citizens stood around a captured tower. A red Imperial flag was torn down. A new one was raised. No symbol, just a single flame in white. Kira Len stood at the front, dust and soot on her face, her eyes burning with hope. He spoke, she said, and we heard. Back on Arakan Prime, Vecca turned toward the camera. Drone still broadcasting. I will say this once, he spoke. To any who believe Earth can protect you, you are wrong. He stared down the lens. If you rise, you will burn. Jake stepped into the frame beside him, and calmly said, if you burn one world, 10 more will rise. He turned to the camera. This isn't the end of fear. Not yet, but it's the beginning of the end. The final message echoed across every corner of the galaxy. He stood in the lion's den, and the lion blinked. Admiral Jake Morrison had returned from Arakan Prime alive, not in chains, not as a corpse, but as a symbol. On thousands of worlds, people who had lived in silence for generations now found their voice. In the heart of Earth's command center, Alina Ray watched dozens of live feeds. Rebellions, marches, peaceful protests. Every one of them inspired by Jake's words, but none of them planned by Earth. They had simply begun. They're not asking for help, Alina whispered. They're acting on their own. A tech officer replied. They call themselves the Second Flame. Some say they're not waiting anymore. She turned to the main screen, which showed Sector 9R, where civilians had just blocked off an Imperial transport route with nothing but bare hands and courage. They don't need ships, Alina said. They've got belief. On the moon of Vectal, a group of children painted flames on old factory walls. In the jungles of Corridor, freedom fighters used recordings of Jake's speech as recruitment tools. On Arakan Prime itself, citizens gathered at night in secret meetings, not with weapons but with questions. And one question was being asked more than any other. If Earth stood, why can't we? Inside the Imperial Palace, Supreme Leader Vecca stood before a private council of his oldest commanders. He didn't yell, he didn't show fear, but his voice was different and quieter. "This is not a military problem," he said. "This is an infection. They think he is hope," one general said. "He is only one man." Selin finally spoke. "No," she said. "He is a mirror, and the people are seeing themselves for the first time." Vecca turned away from them and looked into the distance. "You can crush bodies," he whispered, "but not thoughts." Selin said nothing, because she knew he was right, and maybe he did too. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison sat quietly in his private quarters aboard the Sentinel, watching replay after replay of the galaxy rising. He didn't smile, he didn't feel proud, he just felt. Heavy.Elina entered the room. "You did it," she said. Jake shook his head. "I didn't do anything, I just lit a match." She sat beside him, "And now there's fire everywhere." He looked at her and said softly, "We need to make sure it doesn't become chaos." The Galactic Council met in an emergency session. For once, the delegates didn't argue. They listened. Dozens stood to speak, one after another. "I watched a planet rise without ships. My people are no longer afraid. Humanity gave us something we forgot, dignity." When Earth's representative stood, he said only this: "Fear ruled too long. Today, we speak of choice." And the Council voted. Earth was accepted into the Galactic Federation unanimously. But more importantly, Earth was no longer seen as new. They were seen as necessary. In Sector 7F, Kira Len stood at a makeshift podium in front of thousands. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried far. "We don't follow Earth," she said. "We follow what Earth reminded us of." A pause. "Courage, truth, fire." She raised her fist. "And we keep the flame burning." The crowd raised theirs to "No weapons, no banners, just belief." On the Imperial front lines, something strange began to happen. Entire squads stopped receiving orders. Ships turned around mid-flight. Some officers simply walked away, and messages started appearing, unsigned but familiar. "We are not yours. The galaxy has changed. We remember who we are." In his private chamber, Vecca stood before a silent screen, for the first time in his long reign. He had no words. Selin stood beside him and whispered, "Empires fall, but sometimes they don't fall with explosions. They fall with silence." Vecca turned to her. "What do I do now?" She met his eyes. "You listen." Back on Earth, Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the United Colonies Assembly. Reporters waited. Leaders stood. Billions watched. Jake didn't read from a script. He didn't need to. He looked into the camera and said, "This isn't Earth's victory. This is a galaxy remembering how to stand. If we led the first step, now you take the next." A long pause. Then he said one final thing. "We're not the flame. You are."